Hello, everyone. This is Natalie Armstrong-Motin interviewing author, mediator, and therapist Esther Carson-Blue about her book, Getting Unstuck. Hi, Esther.
Hi, Natalie.
Thanks for coming back to me. We're talking now about Chapter 5, and I know that for a lot of people, this is going to be a really notable chapter. This is a chapter about forgiveness.
Yep. So a lot of people are good at blaming because it's hard to be important to yourself and take responsibility for the life that you're creating. And certainly if things have been difficult, it's kind of normal, I'm sorry to say, to think that somebody else did it to you or something bad happened. And sometimes people really are a victim, which is to be powerless, right? If the bridge falls down on your car when you're in it, under it, you didn't make that happen. So sometimes one is really a victim, but sometimes people victimize themselves. And the really bad thing about that, the destructive thing, is that when we see ourselves as having suffered and all kinds of bad things and we can't do anything about it and we're helpless and all that stuff, which is why that helpless chapter is so important, then we tend to feel entitled to special treatment because we've suffered. And that makes things messy.
That actually makes us weaker.
It does. So this idea about not blaming parents, not blaming your childhood, all that kind of stuff, the point of looking at it, a lot of people are sort of disparaging about, oh boy, there she goes with the childhood stuff. Well, the reason that matters is because you were there. Things happened. You had experiences, you learned lessons, you didn't learn lessons, whatever happened, happened. But one of the whole ideas about getting unstuck is that we get to learn from our experience. Sometimes we learn more from negative experience than positive experience because positive stuff works. So there's lots of times we don't actually learn why it worked or whatever. So really taking time to learn, like, what does it mean to me? Like that my parents were alcoholics or one died or who knows what happens. How did that impact me? And what can I learn about myself and other people and situations and so forth? So first of all, it's to really, the whole point of looking back is to understand, well, what happened? Like, what happened? Like, well, there was 9/11 and life was different in New York the day after 9/11. Like, it was different. So you got to look at that stuff and learn. Like, a lot of people had PTSD after that, like, so forth. So it's important always for individuals to be important enough to yourself and expect yourself to learn either something from something positive or something negative.
And then you spend a bit of time in this particular chapter about how easy it is for us to make excuses because of what we've thrived through or survived through. And that when we make those excuses for what happened to us in the past, and we make excuses for what's happening or what we're allowing to happen now, how it actually takes away the 4 chapters prior to this. Your self-respect, your choosing, your all of those chapters that we've previously covered. If you get to this chapter, chapter 5, and you're still working through this excuse victim mentality, then you've sort of undone all the work that we did in previous chapters, correct?
A little bit. And lots of times we've really made a mess of things. So if you actually read this book, you will discover that I made a mess of a lot of stuff. But so therefore what? Like, okay, I made a mess of that and I made bad choices and I wasn't doing a lot of stuff so well. So therefore, what? And now what? So now I'm 25, 30, 35, like, well, now what? And so I either have to learn and make amends and come to terms with things and forgive myself. And, well, why did you do, like, what were you thinking? Well, I was thinking stuff that didn't make sense, or I was thinking stuff like when I was 10 years old. And so, I need to be willing to forgive myself and say, you know what? I remember those days, and I remember I didn't think it was possible to do this or that, or I was afraid, or I wasn't brave, or whatever. And you know what? I think that anybody might have been confused, and anybody might have made bad choices, and even if they didn't, so I have learned I don't do that anymore, and I've made amends with people or whatever. So to be willing to look at the truth of things and to tell yourself the truth about why you did or didn't do whatever you did or didn't do. Like,
Right.
okay, now what? Now it's 3 days later, 3 years later, 3 decades, like, now what? And that's the question, right? That you made big mistakes, big bad choices. Therefore, what is your life over? Like, you can't learn, you're stuck, like, what? So being willing to look at that and forgive yourself and recover. That's sort of the point of the whole book, and not being defined by things either that happened to you or that you did yourself.
Right.
If you used drugs or told lies or whatever bad stuff you did, like, okay, now what? You're going to keep doing stuff that didn't work?
Right. And in this chapter, there's in every chapter, there's language that I like, but in this chapter, there's language that I really like. You talk about forgiveness, and then you also talk about letting go. And so for the viewer, what's the difference between letting go and forgiveness?
Right. Thanks for that. Lots of times people will say, well, yeah, it's like, and then you talk to them about some incident that was bad, and it's just hot. It's just like it's happened yesterday, and it's like the feelings come back like that. Well, that is not done, right? It's still, I like to say, hot. Okay, you haven't worked through it, you haven't processed it, you haven't learned from it, you haven't forgiven yourself, you haven't dealt with it. Whatever language you want to use, you haven't dealt with it, with yourself. You haven't told yourself the truth, you haven't felt how bad you feel, all that stuff. And so the idea is that I don't want all that history to continue to take up all that room in the present today. Like, it happened 6 years ago, 26 years ago, whatever. And so letting go means I've looked, I've learned, I've forgiven, I've dealt with, I understand myself, I've learned, I get what happened, I understand why I did what I did or didn't do, or mistake or whatever, and I've forgiven myself.
Right.
And I'm willing to let it go and move forward. Well, here's the thing. This is kind of a silly example, but since you're a mom, you'll relate to this. Most women, when they've had a baby, or most people when they've had a really serious injury, it was extremely painful. And you can remember that. Okay. Oh boy, I remember when I broke that leg. I remember that toothache. I remember that kid. Okay. And I don't feel physically that pain today. I've let it go. So you don't ever have to worry about letting something go, being sort of emotionally finished with something, because you're never going to forget it. You're not going to forget that you broke your leg. You're not going to forget that stuff, but you're not going to it's not going to be emotionally hot. So letting go is really key to being able to move forward and have your emotional plate clean, so to speak.
That's a really, really good definition. I like that. Letting go means it doesn't disappear. It's
Right.
just been put in its rightful place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, Esther, thank you so much. And
You're
again,
welcome.
I encourage everyone to go through the book, utilize the space that Esther has given you so that you can write in the book. Or if you're not like me and you don't want to write in a book, go onto Amazon, download the accompanying workbook and write all over that. But go through the exercises one by one. Esther, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.